Oh yes, welcome to another N+1, and today is N equals 26, and today is about Fraggles. Actually, no, today is about Fragments. And Fragments, for those of you who don't know, Fragments are an Android thing. And I'll just start with a little brief introduction to what Fragments are. As I say, they're Android. And Fragments are the future. They've been the future for a couple of years already. They were introduced in Android 3, and so they've been slowly gaining momentum, and now everything is fragments. So maps are fragments, everything control like adverts, etc. that comes out of Google is a fragment. So fragments are the future, and they are the future today. So if you're thinking about developing Android, make sure you check out what fragments are. Stop thinking about building activities really, and start thinking about fragments. So you can think of fragments as a bit like a user control, and you use them to cover a bit of the screen. Now, quite often you'll use them to cover the whole screen, and they'll just be the replacement for the activity. But sometimes you'll use them like to put over a part of the split screen, and then you can think of them a bit like a split screen, a split view in iOS. And you really need to watch out for them and understand them a little bit because they have odd life cycles, particularly when compared to activities. So, for example, when an activity rotates, and it, by default, if you rotate an activity, what happens is the existing activity gets destroyed and a new one gets created. What actually happens to the fragments underneath is they get removed from the activity and they get put back into the new activity. So whilst your activity is being recycled, is being kind of destroyed, your fragments are carried on living. So you need to be a little bit aware about how they're used and what their life cycle is. So with that said, let's start talking about a basic fragment. And obviously what we'll do is go into Visual Studio. And let's just dive straight in there. We're going to create a new project. And as ever, we'll start with the core. There it is. And we'll put it in N+1. And so this is going to be Fraggle. And I think we're up to N26. And in honor of them, we'll call this rock.core. I think I just created the wrong type of library, didn't I? Right, so let's get rid of that because I created the wrong type. And actually, let me open the solution. I'm going very well already in this sample. So let me get rid of rock.core because that's totally the wrong thing. Let's create a new rock.core that is a portable class library. We're probably going to go away with a normal class library because we're only doing Android, but let's do it as a portable class library because that's the way we get to share code. So it's going to be a rock.core, and we're going to make sure that we support Android. We may as well have monotouch xamarin.ios in there as well. Get rid of class 1. Add in the NuGet references for MvvmCross. And then what we can do for this is what we're going to do is we're going to take our first view model, and actually what we're going to do is let us create a main view model. Let's actually create a sub view model. And this sub view model, what we'll do is we'll put this string inside the sub view model. Obviously this needs to inherit from MvvmX view model. And what we'll do with the first view model is we'll give it a sub view. So we'll just do that as public sub view model get set. I should really have done this using a template because I mess it up otherwise. So let's just do that, pmvx, and this is going to be a sub view model. Let's just call it underscore sub, and it will be called sub. And when we create it, let's just create one of these by default as a new sub view model. So there's nothing particularly exciting or complicated going on here. It's just a contained view model within first view model. So that should build. And now let's take our application and add a new project to it. And this is going to be the Android UI. And we'll just start, because we want to show that fragments can be used all the way back in Honeycomb, And indeed, they can be used back in 2.2 as well. Let's just start with a honeycomb optic application. Now, I better check actually. Yeah, I've got a Jelly Bean emulator up at the moment, so that should be okay. So I will start with just an Android application. That should do fine. Back to 2.2 or 2.3 this will be. And I will call this one rock.droid. And hit OK. And that should go off and generate it. And then I'm going to do my normal things of adding a reference to the core. Gosh, it feels like a long time since I recorded a N+1, so I hope I don't do too much wrong. And then I'll add a NuGet package for MvvmCross, which will add everything I need. And then the other thing I really need is I need fragments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look here for fragments. And you can see there, fragment. You can see the top hit for fragment was this HotTuner Droid fragment support. So I'm going to add that as well. And having done that, if I just hit build, what we should see is we'll hit some problems. And these problems, hopefully I hit problems, otherwise I've done something very wrong. These problems are all saying, well, hang on, I haven't got these Android support v4 view pager or whatever else is here. And what these things are is these are the support packages that enabled Google and Android to support these version 3 features back in version 2. So in order to support them, what you have to do is you have to go to add references again. And up in the assemblies version, you should be able to find, and there it is in the middle, you should be able to find the mono.android.support.v4. And so if you click on that and check it, then you can import it and you'll see it's in the reference list. And now when you build, those problems should hopefully go away. Hopefully go away. It's taking its time at the moment. I think the machine's running slow again. And then we also can get rid of these dead things, these activity ones. But basically, we're ready to go. So let's take a look at our project. And as we know at the moment, we've probably got just a first view. And that first view, we want to be able to support fragments. And in order to do that, you take a look at the MVX activity that's there, and you add the word fragment. So what you do is you say, I am a fragment supporting activity. And for those of you who are familiar with Android, with what fragments are already, the fact that we're using the support package here means that we are actually inheriting from the support packages version of the fragment activity, and I'm afraid there's no alternative at that moment. You cannot just say, I'm only going to work on version 3 or version 4, and I won't use the support pack. So at the moment, if you're using our libraries, you have to do it. But it should be fairly easy if you really need to remove this dependency on the support pack and then just support version 4. If you need that, get in touch. Log a request on GitHub or ask a question on Stack Overflow about it. Okay, so that's the fragment ready, the view ready to support fragments. And now what we'd like to do is actually build a fragment. So a fragment is a bit like a user control. It's also a bit like an activity. So what you can do is you can just build it. So what you can do is you can say build class. I'm going to have a sub frag, yeah, and that's going to inherit from an MVX fragment. And we'll let resharper bring in the namespace for fragment. And then all you need to do really is the same sort of thing as you do here for onCreate in terms of setting the content. But instead of having the onCreate method or on the onSetViewModel method, what you have instead is you have a override called onViewCreate that you can intercept. No, it's not onViewCreated, it's onCreateViews you need to override. Sorry about that. onCreateViews. There it is. And what you can do in here is basically you ignore the base class, but you still call it. So you do ignore base dot, and then you inflate what you actually want to inflate. So in our case here, what I'd quite like to do is I would quite like to inflate a block of XML, which we'll give the thing for. And so to do that, we will do this dot binding inflate. Oops, not binding, binding. I should stop talking and stop typing and just give up. So we're going to return this dot binding inflate, and the arguments to the binding inflate, hopefully resharper will find it for us, are that we need to return, we need to pass in the resource that we're going to inflate, so that's going to be a resource.id. And we obviously haven't got it in there at the moment because we haven't built this project with these these views in there. So we're going to build it with first, no, this is going to be a sub fragment, or sub frag we'll call it. And then you need to pass in the owning view group, and it's very important you always just pass in null for that, because otherwise you will hit problems later, and they're very, very obscure problems. So that gives us our subfrag. Let's just put that into its own file. Let's get it out of the way. And you can see it's not particularly complicated. It's a bit, you know, there's a weird boilerplate line where we ignore the base class, and then there's a just a binding inflate, which will do all of our normal data binding. Okay, so that's that. Let's now build the XML for this. There's still one more line we'll need to add to first view, but we'll come back to that. So our default AXML looks like this for our first view, and what we're going to do is we're going to rip that out and copy it across to a subfrag. So just like an activity, it has a XML file. And so that subfrag on its own should work pretty well. It's got a edit text and a text view. And then back in first view, what we can do is we can replace this existing code with a fragment. And so what you do for a fragment is you type fragment, and it's a lowercase f, which is pretty unusual in Android. But there you go, it's a lowercase f. What we do underneath the fragment is we need to give it a class. So this is going to be a C# class, including the casing for the C# class. So in our case, this is rock.droid.views.subfrag. Oops, no, that's right, subfrag. And you'll notice that the casings are there and all that sort of thing. So it really matches what is in the file. And then we just need to give it an ID so that we can actually reference it, because we're going to do a little bit of code behind, which you probably haven't seen much of if you've just been following the N+1s. And we'll call this sub1. Yeah. And then we're going to just give it a height and width. So let's just give it a height and width to fill the parent to start with. And we obviously need to close that off. So that is a very first fragment. You can see it's not got anything particularly too exciting. But what we do want to do is we need to find a way of giving it its view model, because at the moment this hasn't got any binding in it, and you can't just type binding in here. Yeah, this sort of thing here, which is what we'd ideally like to use, we can't use at the moment. So instead of that, what we're going to do is we're going to use a little bit of code behind, and we're going to come down to first view. And what we do here is after we've created our views, we just do, and this is the technical bit, we ask for the support fragment manager. Don't ask for the fragment manager, if there is one, because we don't really have a fragment manager, because we're in a support class. Instead of that, look for the support fragment manager, do a find fragment by ID, pass in that ID that we just gave to it. So this is resource.id, I think we gave it an ID of sub1. That will return you a type. So even though we haven't used a generic form of this, you might have expected generics here, you don't get that. This will return a typed fragment. So this is going to be a sub equals subfrag. Yeah. And then all we need to do once we've got hold of this subfrag is we need to set it to the set its view model. So we'll do a sub.viewModel, and basically it's just saying it's data context. And so what we need to do is find our own view model. We need to cast our own view model to a first view model. It's a bit fiddly, but there you go. First view model. And then we need to pass out, oops, give it a IntelliSense. We need to pass out the sub. So that's it. It was a bit fiddly to see. You can see the basic steps we did were, we created our subfrag and we told it to inflate some XML. We gave it that XML here, which was just normal data binding. In the first view, we then put this fragment in here and we identified its class. And the class was unusual in that it didn't have an Android colon attribute. Having done that, we could then come back to the first view and we could do this block of code here, which is going to get hold of the fragment by its ID from the support fragment manager, and it's going to set the view model on that fragment. You could, in theory, do some different things here to do with lifecycle, but for now, for the first step, this is pretty good. So let's set this as the startup project. And let's see whether or not we can run it. So we will see whether it builds first. Debug start new. And it's saying it doesn't have a subfrag. That's because that should have been a resource.layout.subfrag. There's always a little bug. So that should be subfrag unless I've... Yeah, so there's a resource.layout.subfrag. So hopefully that was my only mistake. Let's hit F5. And while it builds, we can carry on singing the Fraggle Rock song if you like. Hopefully we won't need to resort to that, although it does look like it's going to build quite slowly today. So it's packaging the application, it's going over to my Jelly Bean. It's waiting for Jelly Bean, it's detecting the install, and we'll go through the steps. And so this type of setup, while I'm doing it, this way you put a fragment tag inside your AXML. This is kind of called a static fragment setup. When you use this, you can't use any like kind of replacement mechanisms or anything like that. You just have to build it this way. Hopefully this is going to be up and running soon. Synchronizing assemblies. I may have to turn off fast deployment. I've been having problems with that all day. Let's see. Gosh, it is running slowly. So we boot up our package. Off it runs and builds. Okay, I'm going to have to turn off fast deployment. Sorry for that. I've got some problems with my Android setup at the moment. I need to test it. So that's just turning off a debug setting, and then hopefully this time around it will build and deploy. Okay, it's checking whether it's built or not. Is it? Yeah, there it goes. And this time around hopefully it will actually deploy. Apologies about that. Gives me another chance to start singing Fraggle Rock if it goes too slowly. So it's copying the application across to the device. Hopefully it's going to boot it. Here it goes. And now when this runs up, you probably won't see anything that's different to any of the applications you've seen in the past, except this is running a Fragment. I hope. It's taking its time. Sorry, the emulator is running a bit slow today. Right, so there it is. There's your normal UI. You can see it's databound. If I delete MvvmCross, it really doesn't want to let me. If I delete some characters, then hopefully you can see, there's normal data binding going on there. Right, so that's a very first sample. Let's make it a bit more exciting. Let's suppose that we also would like a second fragment. So here's our first fragment. Let's create a second one. So we'll take subfrag to start with, and we'll just copy it. And let's call this one the... Okay, so we've got subfrag. Let's have dubfrag as well. So we're going to have subfrag and dubfrag. And dubfrag, we're going to have dubfrag as its XML name. So we'll take subfrag and we'll give it to dubfrag. I can regret these names. Being very fraggly today. And so dubfrag, what we'll put in here is we won't worry about an edit text for hello. What we'll do is we'll put in a text for hello, and let's just put in a converter. So converter is going to equal, we'll put this in as the length converter, which means we need to add a length converter. So we'll do that in our main project. Public class length converter. Call it a value converter just so we really remember what it is, and that's going to be an MVX value converter. Sorry, typed it wrong. Converter, and that is going to go from a string to an int, and we'll just override the convert. Override the convert, and so that's just going to return value.length. So there's a value converter written. And what you can now do is, we've got dubfrag, as you can see. We've got subfrag, so now let's just add dubfrag to this first view. So we can add in another fragment as dubfrag. We'll call this one dub1 as its ID. And then in the first view, we will, as well as doing sub, we will do a dub. So we'll do var dub equals dubfrag, and then there's another dub here, dub1. And you can see that we're just going to set exactly the same view model. So what we're doing here, just to be really clear, is we are taking the data object, we're taking that sub view model, and we're using it for both the sub fragment and the dubfrag one. So they will share that data, And when one of them changes it, the other one will get notified. So, you know, it's real proper data mining going on. And if we take a look at this, I'm sure this thing I must have forgotten. Let me just check what I've done here. So the only problem I've got here at the moment is these widths, these heights that I've got. So let me just set the height to be wrapped content, so it's not quite as big. WRAP content. And then I should be able to run this. So we've just added another fragment. That's all we've done to the same data context. So hopefully you can see how these are reusable in some ways. And while that builds, one of the things you can do here, one of the things that fragments are very useful for, is as well as having a layout folder, you can have other layout folders. So you can have things like layout/landscape or /land. You can have layout/large. And what you can do is in each of these you can use different fragments, different combinations of fragments, and you can use different combinations, different like layouts. So you could use one as vertical and one as horizontal. And what that enables you to do is to take the same UI components and just reorganize them in different ways. And that's really, really useful for when, like, you know, you want to reuse the same app, the same logic, the same view models, but you just want to rearrange the UI. And that's what these different folders will be for under layout, layout land, etc. This is just taking its time and wait for it. So I hope it's just taking its time and not crashed or anything. Apologies that the emulator is running a bit slow, I'm not sure what that is. But that layout land, etc. is what you do in real apps when you need to support you know, different size tablets and different size phones. Right, so now we have got, as you can see, one fragment at the top here, which is these top two view controls. I can probably show that. So this is one fragment. This is the sub-fragment here. And then we've got another fragment down the bottom here, which is just this length, and that fragment is there. And hopefully we'll see, let me just get rid of that, hopefully we'll see that if we change the text, then you can see that both fragments share the same data because the length has been updated as well. Okay, so now that's static, that's basic fragments, that's static. Let's also take a look at dynamic fragments. And dynamic fragments are where you can replace these guys, you know, like kind of replacing the engines or whatever, while the application is being shown. So to do that, let me just take our first view model and let me add a home page, because I think that will become in handy here. So let me add a home view model. And that will be inheriting from MvvmCross view model. And let me add a couple of commands to that. Public I command. And that is going to be a, so we'll just have a first and a second command. So that's an MvvmCross command, and obviously all I really want to do is show the first view model. And we'll have another one, which is going to be second. And that's going to allow me to show the second view model. Okay, so all I'm doing is putting a home page on, and I'll make sure that the app by default goes to the home page. Home view model. And I'll also take a look back here in this first view model and let me add a second one, which is actually going to look exactly the same. So we do that, and we do second view model. So there is our first view model, there's a second. Obviously they could share code using a base class or something, but for now that's fine. And what we need to do in the app is obviously we'll need to create a layout for home, so let's do that. So our home view model will look like this. Home view, sorry, we'll just inflate home view for that. So there's our home view, and we'll just put some content in. So copy that, and home view. Okay, so we'll have a button here. We don't need any of this fragment stuff, obviously. And what we'll do is we'll give the first button a text of 1, and we'll bind it to that first command. So when you click it, we want first to fire, and then we'll have a second button. second, and that's got text of 2. So yeah, that's just a normal screen. There's no fragments or anything going on in there, but it's going to enable us to choose whether or not we're going to show the first fragment or second one. So now let's start on a second fragment. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a very similar approach to first. So let's just take it and copy it. But in the XML, instead of using the fragment keyword, we're just going to put a frame layout in place. So let's take a look here. So we've got fragments at the moment. We don't want fragments anymore. What we're going to do instead is we're going to put a frame layout in place. And a frame layout is just, a single frame, which really expects just a single child within it. So we'll call this subframe 1, and we'll call the second one dubframe 1. And obviously we can get rid of these things now, these class names. So that's our layout for our second view. And let's just go and find the second view. And let me just, okay, I haven't got a view for it yet, so let me just start separating these out into files so they're a bit easier to see. That's first, so that's home. First view, what I need to do is copy it. And I will do a second here. And that's going to use the second of the resources. So let's just get that into another file. Okay, so this is our second view. And unlike in the first view, we're not going to do this fragment ID stuff. Instead, what we'd really like to do is we'd like to use those layouts. So the way we do that is, again, we have to use a little bit of code behind to do this. Let me just build it so I get these, so I get the IntelliSense for these resource IDs. Okay, so that's built, so now hopefully we should get a bit more IntelliSense. And what I want to do is I want to get hold of these layouts. So let's add these layouts, because we're going to use them again as private members. So we're going to have a frame layout, which is going to be the sub layout. And because resharper insists I give it a underscore at the start. So we're going to have a sub layout and a dub layout. So let's get hold of those. Actually, I don't think we do need those two guys at all. I think we just use our IDs to put them now. So I won't do that at all. Apologies for that little distraction. What I want to do is I want to set these views up. So to do that, these fragments up within these containers. So to do that, what I do is I create the frag. So let's start with the subfrag. I'll just call it S equals new subfrag. And you can see it doesn't take any constructors or anything. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to give that subfrag its view model. So that's going to be, again, we have to cast it to a second view model this time. And then we do subfrag view model dot sub. Yeah, so that's our subfrag. And now let's do a dubfrag. So this is going to be an F. We want a subfrag and we want a dubfrag. So we've created two fragments, but at this point we haven't put them on the screen. And the way we put them on the screen is we use a transaction. So let's just do that. And what we're going to do is we will take a go at, what you do is you use the support fragment manager dot, is it begin transaction? Yeah, begin transaction. And that returns a transaction. So you store it. And what you then do is you do a trans dot, and there are various things you can do. You can do an add or you can do a replace. Typically I do a replace because I don't really want ever to end up with multiple fragments inside my container. You can do an add, and then you can add as many fragments as you want to a single container. But generally I do a replace. So I do a replace, and what I do is it's asking me for which container I want to use. So I use resource.id dot, and this is going to be the subframe that I want to replace. And I'm going to put in there the fragment, which is S. And then all I have to do is trans.commit, and that will make sure that happens. And then I'd like to do the same thing for the dub frame. So I can create a new trans, or I could just do it inside the existing one if I wanted to. So let's create a new one, because that kind of looks neater in code. I'm not sure if there's any benefits or disadvantages to doing it. So what I'll do is within dub frame 1, I will add the dub frag. So what we should see if we start this up, as long as this builds, I'll just check I haven't made any fatal errors. What we should see when we start this up is we should see that view 1 and view 2 are now pretty much identical. But they're being created in very different ways. So let's see. Hopefully it's going to build for us. Copying across. Here's our emulator, still running a bit slow. Still running incredibly slow. Okay, so it's finally starting. It looks like it's going to take its time still. So when this starts, and hopefully it'll start soon, because otherwise I'll go to sleep, then what we should see is we should see that we will have a 2-button start screen, home view model, and the first one, if we use it, will go to that kind of existing first view that we always had. So you can see it's got the 1, 2, the first thing at the top and the second thing at the bottom. And if we remove stuff from here, then you can see it's bound correctly. If we then go back and we choose the second button instead, hopefully what we'll see, unless I've made a mistake, is exactly the same UI, but it's been created in this other way. It's been created in this dynamic. And you may say at the moment, well, so what? What's the advantage of that? And that's a good question. So let's take a look at that. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to add a button. And this is going to be pure view code, nothing view model at the moment, although we could move some of it to the view model. And there would be advantages in doing that. And what we're going to do is we're going to edit second view. And what we'll do is we will add a button to the bottom of second view. And actually let's add 2 buttons. Let's push the boat out. So we'll have a but1, and this is going to have an Android :text equal to but1. And we'll have a but2 as well. And what we're going to do in these is we're going to do pure code behind. So this is something you haven't seen before really in the N+1s, but you'll see a lot of if you do non-Mvvm code. And what we're going to do is we're just going to wire up these buttons. So let's do that, and let's do but1 bar but1 equals, and so this is going to be a find view by ID, and I can't remember how to do this because I hardly ever do code behind now. But I think it's resource.id, and I think I called it but1, so hopefully it'll come through. And then let's also get but2 while I'm in the mood for this. And what I'd like to do is I would like to really get hold of these fragments and do something differently with them when I click these buttons. So when but1 is clicked, let us do a, so this is going to be a sender, args, and let's handle it. Whoops, not, we need an and as operator. So what I'm going to do is, when but1's clicked, what I'd like to do is another transaction, so this is going to be transaction 3. What I'd like to do is I would like to, let's do something cunning. When button 1 is clicked, I would like to replace the top frame with a dub frame. So I will create a var d new equals new, and this is a dub frag. And again, we have to set the view model for it, otherwise we won't get it. So view model equals, again, we have to use this fairly disgusting syntax here, but you could obviously do it once and then share the syntax across. So that's going to be our dnew. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this into our top frame when that happens. So when we hit button 1, we're going to replace whatever is in the top fragment holder, with a dnew, with a new dub frag. And similarly, when we hit but2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a transaction again. And this time I'm going to replace the bottom frag with a new subview. So let's just do that. Let's make a subfrag. So it's a bit like arbitrary what I'm doing here, but basically this will enable me to switch things around. There's something else I could do as well, which is I can, in these transactions, I can do a trans3, dot add to backstack. Now you can put a name in there if you want to help, but I think I normally just use null. I don't really do this very often, but when I do, I use null. And I can just put it into this one as well. And what that should mean is that I can integrate with the backstack as well. So let's just do that, and we'll do a debug start new. But do be aware that you're adding some memory. Oops, doesn't like but2. Did I add it as here? Okay, so I need to add a but2. Do be aware that if you start using the backstack within an activity, then you will kind of get more memory used up. It's not a biggie, but it's worth looking at. So hopefully I can run this up now. Hopefully it's building. Thinking about it. Something is running very slow here, sorry about that. I think I say a lot of that. I should be around for a faster PC maybe. So that's off and building. Or maybe I should be running less Fraggle videos in the background. So it's copying over, and hopefully in any moment now it will actually launch. Gosh, it's feeling slow. I wonder what it's doing. I wonder if it's because I've turned fast deploy off. Anyway, it's slowly coming to life, and when it does, we can use but1 if we want to, or this first button up here. And that's just the experience we've seen several times, and we don't need to do anything because it's just what we've already had. Or we can go to the second option. And on this option, we now have, as well as kind of our data binding that does fully work, and we can delete things if we want to. And, you know, all the data binding works. We can also replace the top fragment, which is what this but1 does. Let me just get rid of their keyboard. We can replace the top fragment, and now we've got 2 of these but fragments in there. But we could replace the bottom one, and then we'll have a lower low back in there. So we've just created a new fragment, put it in. And I believe that if we use the back button, oh, it didn't work. Why did that not work? That should, when I use the back button, have enabled me to go from one to another. Let me just try. So there's one. For some reason, that's not being intercepted. It should have worked. Let me just check that I added it correctly. I don't see any problem with it. Ah, it's because I added it to trans rather than trans3. Let me correct my evil code. You know, this is very much demo code, so I apologize for it. But let me also replace that because it's confusing that we've got 2 trans3s. So now if I run that up, then we should be able to see it. And I won't do too much more demos here because I think I'm going to run over in terms of timing. So I'll probably switch to a static one after this. But let's at least get this up and running. So this is going to slowly deploy to Fraggle Rock. And when it does, we'll get the backstack, hopefully working with that button. Now, obviously, the type of dynamic replacement that we've done here is dynamic replacement using kind of code behind. You can instead actually use a custom presenter, which hopefully you've seen a bit about in recent talks. And you could intercept the navigation messages. So you could, instead of using this code behind on the button click, you could send it to the view model and then do a show view model. And then in that show view model, what you could do is you could actually intercept and use these fragment transactions to actually change parts of the screen. So this is the first kind of example we've seen in Android of that split view type thing. And there's a really good blog post that's come up in the last couple of days, which hopefully is in the slides at the end of this, which tells you how to do that. And it's great that other people are writing it, so I don't have to explain it. So here is the second screen now, and now hopefully if we replace but1 and replace but2, and then we use the back button, then you'll see that we go back, and then eventually we go back again. So that is the way that fragments and the backstack can integrate together, and I hope that's given you a good introduction to dynamic fragments. You cannot mix and match, so if you've got like XML set up as version 1 with these kind of fragments in there, there's no way you can replace those once they've been built. They are fixed and there for your life. So generally, most people, I think, tend to use these frame layouts or linear layout type approach. So that's fragments in Dynamics. Let's just see where we were. You can also do tabs using fragments because, you know, tabs, each individual item within a tab is a frag control. And I think I'm going to switch to a pre-built one for this because I think otherwise I will probably fail. So this is the fragment sample, and the fragment sample is in the tutorials selection. And the fragment sample, among what it has, is it has something called the tab view. And if you take a look at the tab view, what it's got inside is it's got a casting helper, because it kind of helps. And then its setup is mainly done in the base class, which is an MVX tabs fragment activity. And all it does is it kind of adds these tabs. Some of them have their own view model. You can see there the view model 1 or the view model 2. But these last three, they all share view model 3. And then you can see that there are also tab fragments. There are different types of those. And those are just normal fragments like the type that you've seen plenty of already. You know, there's no code behind or magic in these. And that's it, that's the tab. So if I run that up, and actually, if I'm really lucky, it might already be installed on my emulator. So let me just go home on the emulator. And is there a fragment sample here? Yeah, so what I can do is just run up fragment sample. And I hope this runs up. Looks like it might already be running. Or at least cached. Gosh, this is running slowly, I apologize. But what we should see when I manage to get this up and running. Okay, so this is on a subpage at the moment. So the fragment sample, it starts like this, and it's got a choice of showing a form, which kind of gives you the same sort of experience as we've just seen, or of showing tabs. And you can see here in the tabs that we've got this view model, and you can see that 1 and 2 are pretty much standard view models, and they're the types of things we've seen before. Tab 3 has also got this view model with an editor in there, and if I change something in tab 3, so this is hello now, then we should be able to see that that's also reflected on tab 3.2, and it's reflected on tab 3.3. So all of this data is the same sort of thing, and if I try and correct that, so I now have, I'm just going to have flow instead, you should see that that data is going to be reflected on 3 as well as on the 1 and the 2. So that's tabs, and you can see how little code's involved in setting up those tabs. And I hope that's a different way of doing tabs, and I suspect is the future way of doing tabs, so you should really look at doing it. Another bit of sample we've got in here as well, that was a very quick introduction to tabs, is we do have a sample that actually came from Xamarin in terms of the way they do their fragments. And this does involve a slightly custom presenter. So what we've got is a list of Shakespeare titles. And when you click it, then what we get is we get a full page version of another activity, which has got this fragment inside it. But what you can do instead of that is if you have a different UI, so this is where these folders that I was previously talking about, these different layouts. So what you've got is you've got a page titles view, and you can see that the page titles view just has one fragment in it at the moment. However, if you go to the large layout landscape, then what you'll see is it's got 2 fragments in it. Now we've got some magic that goes on in the custom presenter. So somewhere in setup we should find this custom presenter. Here it is. And this magic simply allows us to work out whether or not we should do a fragment hosted second navigation, or whether we should do a new page navigation. Maybe I'll come back and talk about that another stage, or maybe I'll just point you to the blog post because it's pretty good and pretty useful. But I hope that at least gives you something to play with. So that's the Shakespeare. And then the final thing that we've got in this sample, stays alive. Oops. The final thing we've got in this sample, I managed just to kill it. Hopefully I haven't killed it forever. The final thing that's in this sample is actually the one you can do it, is actually the sample for a dialogue. So the dialogue that's in here is in the home view. And what we've got is when we've got a button that's clicked in the UI, and again this can be done via some other messaging mechanism. Now what we do is we create a dialogue fragment. I'll show you what the dialogue fragment looks at the moment. We give the dialogue fragment a view model, and then we ask it to show it. And what it will do is it will maintain the data in that view model. So hopefully here we can see it. This is a dialogue fragment. It inherits from MVX dialogue fragment rather than MVX fragment. And you can see that it's kind of got its view model, and it does data binding on that view model. So hopefully here you can see that we pass in the view model here. It's kind of already in the base. And that the XML that's used for that see if we can find it. The fragment, it is the resource layout dialog name, so it's this guy. You can see that in the XML for the fragment itself, the dialog, you can see we use normal data binding. So if I show you that one, show dialog, then you'll see that what comes up is a dialog, and you can see that data binding is operating in there, because if we start typing GGGs, then you can see data binding is occurring. So I hope that's reasonable. I hope that you could follow through that. I may have rushed it a bit, I apologise, but the sample's there for you to play with, and it's very straightforward. So that's dialogues via fragments. If you really don't like fragments, and there's good reasons sometimes not to, there's also something called an MvvmCross control. I'll come back and talk about that in a future talk. Remind me if I haven't. But an MvvmCross control is kind of our version of a custom control, and it's very straightforward to use. Actually, go on, let me just use it. I'll just do a quick demo on MvvmCross thing, so I will hopefully be able to show you this. So an MvvmCross control, and I'll do it in Fraggle. So when you have an MvvmCross control, what you can do is I will just take subfrag, Control-C, Control-V, and I will call this the frame content. And what I'm going to do is I'll just leave it as this, as an edit text in a text view. And what I'm going to do is just change this sizes so you know it's happening. And I will also change the color. So I'll do an Android.background, just so again you know it's happening for real. And I'll use a dark blue for this, shall I? So 00007. It's going to be a blue background. And what you can do is if you just want to display this frame content as it is here, and you'd like to display it in your page, then you can do that by going to the page you're in. So let's in this case use the first view. That sounds reasonable. And what we'll do is we're going to use something called a frame control. So that's MvvmCross frame control. And what we'll like to do is we'd like to lay out as ever, filling height and filling width and just wrapping on the height. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to bind its data context. So there's no view model here, it's just a data context. And I'm going to bind its data context to viewModel.sub. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to bind its item, now I think it's its template is what we call it. And I'd like to bind that to layout slash, and that is going to be frame content. And in fact, just because it's a bit fiddly, I'm going to call this something else. I'm going to call this non-frag, just to make clear that this isn't really a fragment. You know, this is our own version, if you like, of fragments. It's been around for longer than fragments, although not that many people know about it. And so it's a non-fragment frame content is what it's going to display. And if I then run this up, it might take a little while to build again, and I may have got a mistake, have I? Let's find out. Hopefully it's building. Okay, so it's now packaging, so we now just need to wait for the emulator again. But what we should see is that this frame control gives us, kind of purely inline version of fragments that we can use. There will no doubt be improvements in our fragment support over the next 6 months, I hope, and possibly less, because I think, as I say, fragments really are the way forward, and we're looking at different ways of using them and different ways of supporting them to make it a bit less code behind. I mean, I know it's only 2 lines of code behind at the moment, but it's still 2 lines that we'd like to get rid of. So hopefully this is going to build and run. Let's see what's going on. Output. Okay, it's just very slowly running. It must be something to do with the emulator. That normally flies by that trace. Yeah, I'll wait. It's still running. And hopefully, I said something there about the GPUs. Maybe there's a GPU issue with this emulator. Hopefully now, if we go to number 1, we should see this frame control. And it looks like I haven't managed to set the... so what I've done wrong is I didn't actually need the viewModel.sub here, so let me do that one. And then it would have bound. So let's get rid of that. You can see I got at least the frame coming up, but it didn't bind because I didn't need the viewModel.sub, I just needed the .sub. So all it is it's a normal property, as it were. So that's going to take its time to build. I'll come back to that in a moment. Let me just finish off the slides. So that's the frame control. We'll see it working in a moment. If you want to see this fragment-based navigation, as I said, let me copy. Let me see what happens when I click on it. Then, as I say, I think this is Fuel. I think this is Opcode who's written this. I'm not sure. This is a good description, a good tutorial about how to use them. How to use fragments within a presenter. It's posted by Andrew, but I think it might be an Andrei. And you can see, it's a really useful way of doing this so that you can have your navigations within a page without doing a whole page navigation. And then the other sample that you've kind of seen in the background there, oops, that's not the sample at all. It's nothing to do with good vibrations. The other sample that you need, so I'm going to edit this PowerPoint slide live now. The other sample is the Fragments sample. Where's PowerPoint? So it's nothing to do with that, it's the Fragments. And so I need to change the hyperlink. And hopefully, if we now go back to the sample, this is the sample that's got the fragments. It's not really as much of a work in progress as it was. It's got some useful things in there. As I say, it's got the dialogue, it's got the tabs, and it's got like a form example. So it's a really good starting place, and it's also got that Shakespeare titles thing. So hopefully now our emulator in the background has now got a 1 and 2. If we hit 1, then you can now see we have, this is down below is our frame control, and hopefully you can see that, if we remove things here, then you can see how the entire screen is data bound together. This is one fragment at the top here, there's another fragment for this 3, and then there's this frame control, which isn't a fragment at all, but it's kind of our custom bound control, and that is for our third type of functionality. So I'm going to stop there. I hope that you kind of got something out about fragments from that. That was N=26, and it was all about
Ooh, a fuego! Hey, look, Ma! I got a fuego!
Take scares away, worries for another day. Let the music play. Down in Fraggle Rock, down in Fraggle Rock,
Down in Fraggle Rock.